I'm Judith Royal. The League of Women Voters welcomes you to this program on the independent map. The League of Women Voters supports the independent map campaign and petition drive because the League, as a nonpartisan organization, encourages informed and active participation in government. Because the League aims to influence public opinion, public policy through education and advocacy. In October, the Independent Map Campaign, which is also a nonpartisan organization, designated the League of Illinois as one of its volunteers of the month. Elgin area, McHenry County, Greater Peoria, Glenview, Glencoe, Champaign County, and Palatine Leagues are among the leagues that have earned this designation for the League of Women Voters of Illinois. Other independent map supporters span the political spectrum and include such civic organizations as Common Cause Illinois, Illinois PIRG, and Citizen Advocacy Center. Current and former elected and appointed officials like former Governor Jim Edgar, former Illinois State Representative Suzanne Bassey, former Chicago Mayor Richard M. Daley, and former Illinois State Representative Kathleen Briggs supports Independent Map. And I'm only naming a few of the people who support it. Also, there are supporters from the business, civic, and community. Now, the League of Women Voters from Arlington Heights, Mount Prospect, and Buffalo Grove area can get on board and support Independent Map. Mary Kubasek, President of the League of Women Voters of Illinois and member of the Independent Map Board, has said, "The League of Women Voters of Illinois is excited to be working for redistricting reform because every contact we make, every signature we collect, every speech we make brings us closer to our decades-old goal of maps which offer the voters a real choice of candidates for election." Glenview League member Jane Bellingy referred to Independent Map as the first step in fixing Illinois. Paula Lawson, former president of the League of Women Voters of Illinois and Glencoe League member, said, "I believe, as does the League of Women Voters, that citizens should be encouraged to actively participate in government and that government should be responsive to the will of the people. Having legislators draw their own districts results in a lack of contested elections, discourages citizens from participating actively, and from the government being responsive to citizens. The Independent Map allows citizens to have input into the mapping process. It will empower citizens and result in more competition for legislative office catalyzed by citizen participation." This is our opportunity to get involved with this effort because there is still work to be done. So let's find out. What is Independent Map? Christopher Butler is here to explain and later to answer your questions. Mr. Butler is State Field Director for Independent Map. The goal of this nonpartisan organization is to improve Illinois state government by making our legislators more accountable to voters. The League thanks Mr. Butler for making the drive to Arlington Heights and for sharing this evening with us. He will talk for about 15 or 20 minutes and answer questions. I would suggest that you raise your hands and let him acknowledge you. Please welcome Christopher Butler.
Thank you. I'm putting myself on a timer.
Thanks for coming.
Make sure that I do all right. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. It is really exciting, and I'm always humbled to do league meetings because of all of the organizations and people working on independent maps in Illinois. I think the League of Women Voters is one of the most active and most important to the current effort. It also has a special place for me because I was actually introduced to this issue in 2010 when the League was fighting this fight pretty much by itself. So very much thanks from me to the League for leading on this issue for a really long time. And I'm excited to say that with independent maps, we've got a real opportunity to finally get this reform in Illinois, which I think is one that we really need. So I'm going to jump into some slides, and you know, the way I do it, you know, if you have a question as I'm going along, just raise your hand. You don't have to wait till the end. We'll go right after it if you have questions as we go. If it's on a slide, I'll say we'll get to that. Good enough? So I'll start with a little bit of just background on redistricting in general. The process of redistricting really makes sense. Every 10 years, based on the census, the Constitution says that we should redraw our legislative districts to respect population shifts. Over 10 years, people move, things change, communities are built, all types of things happen, so populations move around, and every 10 years, the Constitution says, let's reset the board and make sure that the districts are representative of the population. So redistricting, from that perspective, makes sense. And the basic regulation in the Constitution, while it doesn't go far enough, it makes sense. It says that the districts have to be substantially equal in population. Substantially equal in population. They have to be compact, and they have to be contiguous. They've got to be right next to each other. And other than that, there are no regulations on, you know, how we draw legislative districts. That keeps showing up. There's not too much here, so that's redistricting. It makes sense in general. It starts to lose its sensibilities, if you will, as we go deeper into Illinois' redistricting process. The way we do redistricting really leaves politicians to draw the maps all by themselves. The new legislative maps basically go through a fairly traditional legislative process where legislators are able to submit proposals for a map, the legislature is able to vote, and a supermajority of the legislature has to approve any map for it to become the law. So the problem with that is that usually legislators will draw very partisan maps as their initial proposals, right? Maps are designed to keep you know, one party or the other safe, right? So you'll have essentially a Democrat map, and you have a Republican map, and you have to get a supermajority to agree on that map. So when the legislature is even somewhat balanced, it's very difficult to get that supermajority, right? Because all of the Republicans support the Republican map, and all the Democrats support the Democratic map, and so there's no agreement on the initial vote. And so the next step in the process is that if the legislature can't agree, it goes to a commission that is appointed by the legislative leaders. So I told you it stopped making sense. You know, so Republicans and Democrats can't agree, so we asked the two Republican leaders and the two Democratic leaders to appoint members to a balanced commission, and they're supposed to come to an agreement. And I guess I will give a benefit of the doubt to the folks who drew up the Constitution. They say that the thought was this smaller group would never want to leave it to the next step in the process, and so they would always come to an agreement because nobody would ever want to send such an important decision as redrawing legislative districts to the next step in the process, which is totally random change. Right? So if the commission that's balanced between Democrats and Republicans cannot come to an agreement, it goes to chance. Now, we have this nifty picture of a coin flip. It was actually even more bizarre than a coin flip. In our state, we have very sophisticated policy where the names of a couple of Democrats and the names of a couple of Republicans are deposited into a hat. and the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court draws a name from that hat, and that person whose name is drawn from the hat, this is no lie, becomes the tie-breaking vote. And whichever party gets the tie-breaking vote, that party gets 100% control over drawing the maps. And remember, the only regulations that they have to abide by is that the districts be substantially equal in number, that they be compact, and that they be contiguous. Those three framework, that three-point framework is it. So what happens in reality is that this policy consolidates power into the hands of a few folks, basically the legislative leaders. And again, this really doesn't matter what side of the aisle you sit on and where you come from. It really just concentrates this power into the hands of the legislative leaders, because what happens is that the leaders control the map drawing process, and so they can punish you or reward you for your loyalty. If you are good and loyal and they think that you're a good legislator, they can draw you a very safe district. And if you're bad and, rowdy and don't agree with everything that the leaders say that you should agree with, then they can draw you out of your district. So it concentrates a lot of power into these legislative leaders, and basically, as the slide says, it makes kingmakers out of the legislative leaders instead of making kingmakers out of the voters. And I will make an aside from my own experience in electoral politics. I find that a safe district is a district that is largely homogeneous in terms of its party affiliation, and geographically impossible to organize. And if it's geographically impossible to organize, it's usually geographically impossible to really serve as a legislator. I can tell you I was down in Kankakee one night last week talking to a group like this, and I was in Kankakee to get out to this meeting. I drove past farms and that kind of a thing. And I said to the folks in the meeting, because this is true, I think it's on the next slide here. Well, it's not on that, but we'll see it in a minute. But I said to this crowd, we're in Kankakee. I drove past farms to get to. But the northern end of their legislative district was on 87th and Cottage Grove in the south side of Chicago.
Oh.
So if I want to call a community meeting, for that legislator to talk about, how is this legislator doing, I've got to get folks from 87th and Cottage Grove on the south side of Chicago and Kankakee, Illinois, where the farms, I just drove by farms. And so it's a very difficult situation to organize them and to govern. So as long as you have a D by your name, you're probably going to be all right when it comes to the election. So the process is really messy. So there are two ways to fix the process. And this slide really just talks about why do we choose a citizens initiative as opposed to just another route. There are only two ways to change it because it's fixing the Constitution. One way is for the legislature to vote 3/5 majority to change the system. So that would be the legislators voting to take this power away from the legislature. And we just thought that that was probably not going to work. And so the only other way to do this is through a citizens initiative. And I'm very thankful that at least there is a ballot initiative possibility, because the reform is so needed. What has happened in the state, and I think everybody in this room probably pays some attention to what's going on in the state right now, and a lot of the budget gridlock and the kind of no compromise vitriolic back and forth has to do with these really, really powerful few who just don't have to really have any regard for the folks who vote for them when the elections come around, because they're in these safe districts that are impossible to lose. So we go to the ballot initiative. Our goal is to change this policy or this process through a ballot initiative. The first thing that we have to do to do that is to draft a good amendment. And we think we've drafted a good amendment. We've learned a lot. We were able to learn a lot from the last effort because it was thrown out in court, but the opinion that was delivered by the appellate court and Judge Mikva was, it was very, very instructive. And so we got a bunch of really smart attorneys, which I'm not one of them, but they got together, they looked at the instructive decision from Judge Mikva and tried to fix what was wrong with the last amendment, and we really believe, had a lot of legal folks look at this, we believe that we got a strong amendment that will hold up to legal challenge. The second step is to gather 300,000, a little more than 300,000 valid petition signatures. So anybody who's ever run for office or helped somebody get elected, the first phase is gathering petitions. And in our state, you get to challenge folks' petition signatures. And again, the challenge process in Illinois, I won't comment on that because that's not what I'm assigned to talk about here tonight. But folks will just come in and say, I don't think that's the right signature, and then, the State Board of Elections can throw it out. And so we're sure that these signatures are going to be challenged. 300,000 of them have to be valid, so we figure we have to gather upwards of 500,000 total signatures in order to withstand a challenge. Then you defend it in court, and then you have to conduct a voter campaign. When it gets to the ballot in 2016, we're going to need, my guess is somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.7 million people to vote yes on the question. So it's a long road, but it's an important thing to do, which is why I put this slide back after all that. Why is it important to do this? When you track from 1970 to current, every redistricting, save the last one, which we'll talk about, has gone to the tiebreaker, which is the name draw. And after the name draw, the party that won that raffle has experienced 10 years of really concentrated power. What has happened though in the state, and I think that this is a problem, doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, is that the Democrats actually won a few in a row. And so the last redistricting actually didn't have to go to the tiebreaker because the Democrats had a super duper majority in both houses and were able to just put their map through. And even, to me, even if you're a Democrat, that's a problem because you don't want districts that you can win just because you're a Democrat. You want districts that you have to win because the people in that district believe that you're doing justice to them and that you're representing them well in the legislature. And when you draw these districts that are safe because they are impossible to organize, that doesn't serve the people. And even if you're a Democrat, it doesn't serve you, as best as possible. So both parties have benefited from the system over the years. Both parties have been hurt by the system over the years. But the folks who get hurt the most, as you can see from these maps, are the folks who have to live in these districts. The folks, this was the district that I was in, that starts in Kankakee and goes up to 87.
Well, we've got one here that goes to Des Plaines all the way down south suburbs.
Yeah, you can see these districts here. I did a lot of work in my churches in the Inglewood community, and that's right down here. One neighborhood in the city of Chicago, 6 legislators. Who represents the neighborhood? Nobody. And so the folks who lose out are the folks who live in the district, because these folks are not representing anybody. It's too all over the place. I just like the hat side, but you can't leave this stuff to chance. It's way too important. I've talked about some of the tricks of of map making. You lock folks out of the district, you lock folks into a district. I didn't put it on the slide, but I could show you, even though it's not a state legislative district, it's a congressional district, but it's one of those things that shows how gerrymandering works. I forget what year now, but Barack Obama ran against Bobby Rush for Congress. He lost a narrow election, and then before the next election, it was redistricting. So the congressional district was redrawn, and when you look at the map, it literally goes to Barack Obama's block, goes one block to the west, goes up a block, and then comes back and takes up the rest of the district just like it was always drawn. It literally drew right around his house. And they do it with state legislative maps also. The civil rights and voting rights language that is in the federal statute is going to become part of the state statute. It's also going to be in the state statute that you may not, you shall not, in legal language, dilute the ability of a racial or language minority community to elect candidates of its choice. This is language that is not in the Constitution right now. It's language that protects minority voting rights, and it's language that I think would yield more protected communities and minority communities, more protected districts rather, than the current map kind of gives us. I won't preach on that anymore. It's dear and dear to my heart. To the extent practical, we have to respect the geographic integrity of communities. That's very key. It's not in the Constitution right now, but it will be in the Constitution that to the extent possible, you can't cut Arlington Heights up into 15 different legislative districts because it's a community. It's recognized, it has a boundary. You should try to respect that boundary. And then you can't intentionally or unduly discriminate against any political party. So no more, say district, no more Republican district, no more any of that kind of stuff, because you won't be able to look at political data. And then you'll look at partisan data based on the Voter Rights Act in the federal statute. So again, you'll be able to look at partisan data to the extent that it is reasonable for the map, right? But you won't be able to look and say, okay, we're going to make a Democratic district, just for Democratic district's sake. It'll only be for voting rights application. It's the only time you can look at political data. So these last few slides we'll go through really quickly. I talked about some of this. We believe that the campaign is going to be successful because we've learned from 2 previous campaigns in the field. We've learned from Judge Mikva's decision, and we've organized a large bipartisan, nonpartisan really, organization. We got out to the field much earlier than the previous campaigns, and we've already gotten over 350,000 petition signatures signed. We've got a big coalition that includes some really great groups like the League, the ARP, the Farm Bureau, lots and lots of other folks. This last slide just throws up a lot of our board members that come from all over the place, in all parts. So that's what we're doing, independent maps. So what can you do to help? Right now, we're trying to gather those 600,000 petition signatures. So before we leave tonight, if what I've said has made sense and you haven't signed a petition, I've got one here that you can sign. I've also got a stack. I did a meeting earlier where folks were a little bit more anxious than I thought they were going to be, but I still got a stack of about 20 or 25 petitions that you can take and get your family, get your friends, your neighbors to sign. So we'll throw it to questions. Anybody have a question?
Is there any organized opposition to your
Absolutely.
There is.
Yes. The establishment, and I don't know if I'm supposed to say this or not as a representative of the organization, but I can tell you as Chris Butler, the establishment Democratic Party is very, very opposed to this, because as we showed on the timeline, currently they have a super duper majority in both houses, and so theoretically they never, ever, ever have to relinquish that power if this reform doesn't take place. So there is pretty organized opposition.
I mean,
to this.
and the argument is what? Well, what would I hear out there if somebody said to me?
You will hear that this is just a power grab by the Republicans.
Oh, okay. Okay, I just wanted to see what the,
Yeah. And anybody who tells you that, you can tell them you met a guy
okay,
on
okay,
the west side of Chicago,
okay.
probably not the biggest Republican in the world, who's working on this effort. Nothing against Republicans, but, you know.
My question is, there was someone collecting petitions at the library and it was not Independent Map. Is there a separate organization and are they collecting petitions for the same amendment or have they drafted their own amendment?
This is very, very clever politics, right? So there is another organization organized by folks who oppose this amendment, and they have organized an organization, a ballot initiative called the People's Map. And it is designed, at least in my opinion, the folks who organized it, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think, though, that is really good political play to confuse people. Their logo is very similar to our logo. It just changes the word independent for peoples. And, you know, they're out, they gather signatures, they're called people. And I think it's just designed to confuse folks because then, you know, if you get two amendments to the ballot that have a similar tagline, folks go out and they don't know which one to vote for. And so neither one gets enough votes to pass. And the status quo rules the day.
So how is that other one written, either amendment, if they've written an amendment?
I don't know because I've not seen it. I've heard that folks are out gathering petitions. I've not seen it. If you see another one, grab it and email it to me because I would love to see the language
Oh.
of that.
Chris, has it been discussed if both of these petition drives collects enough signatures and are submitted to the election board, if my name is on both of those, for example, what happens? Are both petitions challenged because I'm on both of them?
And don't know. I would gather not. And don't quote me on this because this would have to go to like an election lawyer. But I don't think that it would because it's not like the ballot initiatives compete with each other like electoral candidates. In an electoral campaign, it would definitely, you can't have duplicates, but in this instance, I don't think that that's the case. But I can find out from a real election lawyer and get that information back to this team.
There can be corruption in who makes the rules about the challenges too, because we had a petition initiative a number of years ago, and then it was challenged by some people at the last minute, and it went to the first level, which was just at the village board with a select group, and then it went several layers higher.
Yep.
And our petitions were thrown out because they didn't have the right kind of binder clips on them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean,
That's gotta be
the
correct,
rules
because what
are
does it
really
matter?
specific, and, you know, I can say this, there are a lot of elected and appointed people who will have the opportunity to look at these petitions and make judgment calls on their validity, which is why we want to have just an overwhelming number of valid, properly prepared signatures to submit to the state board of elections.
I'm not too familiar with Illinois law, and I'm just concerned that if we pass an amendment like this, is it going to mean a constitutional convention, or can it be done without opening that door?
Yeah.
So this is one piece of the Constitution that can be amended by a ballot initiative. Most of the Constitution can't be amended by ballot initiative and would have to be dealt with in constitutional convention, but this can go through ballot initiative and it would not require a constitutional convention.
So if you get the required signatures, this will be on the ballot in November 2016, and any of us, all of us, will have an opportunity to vote yes or vote no.
Yes.
Nitty gritty, what are the requirements for valid signatures, for getting those signatures?
So that's a very, very good question.
So it's, if I I say I want to get some signatures, what do I need to do? What do I need to know?
You got to get the voter's signature. First off, they've got to be registered voter. They've got to sign their signature. They want to try to sign it as close to how they signed their voter registration card when they signed it, which is one way where we lose a lot of signatures. But that's another thing. I'm not talking about the challenge process. So you get the signature, the street address, because they have to put their address down on the petition, and the street address needs to be the address where they are registered to vote. So if you just moved out of mom's house, then and you plan to change your voter registration, or you did change your voter registration, make sure that those are the same. So if you're still registered at mom's house, put mom's address down, because that's where you're registered. And if you changed your voter registration, make sure that you put that address. So those are the big things to make sure that it is a signature, not just a printed name. That the signature is as close to what they signed on their voter registration card, and that the address is where they are registered to vote. And I've done this a lot, and I know there are folks who, I said that to one guy recently, and he's like, I don't remember when I signed my voter registration card. I said, I know I was 18, I'm 52. So,
But you have to sign every time you vote. And
yes,
they show you what your signature looks
Yeah.
like, so you should know.
yes. Well, I don't know. I haven't forgotten. But yeah, it's the problem for me is that they compare it to the original one. I think they should actually compare it to the last, because you actually do sign every time you vote.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
compare it back to that.
And then when do you need these by?
So when is the great question, right? So technically when we need them in April of 2016. Realistically when we need them most immediately, and here's why. One thing that I keep preaching in our board meeting and our staff meetings and in these meetings is that this is not a signature gathering campaign. This is a ballot initiative. So, and the signature gathering is just precursor. So you really need to get these signatures in so that you can turn your fundraising and your public efforts to public education on, educating folks about this issue, which is sort of obscure and kind of complicated, so that everybody knows what it is and why it's there, and that they should vote, and that they should vote yes. And I don't think that you can really get that done between May of 2016 and November of 2016. So the sooner we're able to stand up and say, hey everybody, we got 500, 600,000 signatures, we're ready to go, we can start to turn fundraising efforts, and outreach efforts, and everything toward let's win on the ballot.
Back to the requirements though on the petitions, isn't there some rules about, like, for instance, in Arlington Heights, a lot of people just put down AH or even ARLHTS, and doesn't it have to be written out? Isn't that one of the things?
It should be written
Is
out.
there a
Yes.
sheet of instructions with the petition so that?
So if you, I don't have that sheet with you, but we do have on our website, which is mapamendment.org, a whole list of all the kind of technical instructions. It is correct that it should be written out. I can say that, at least in electoral situations where I've been involved with campaigns, a good lawyer, which we do have, a good lawyer, can go in and fight for those types of, if it's signed, the street address is correct, and the town says AH, a good lawyer can get in there and fight for those signatures. But again, the goal is to have such an overwhelming number of valid signatures that the challenges just don't hold up, because the State Board of Elections, and if it goes to a court to court, will see that you might be able to get rid of 200,000 of these signatures. There'll still be 100,000 over the number, and that's when they start to throw out the challenge.
Chris, can I help you a little bit here? Because I looked at this today, and it's very similar to the previous petition drives that Nancy knows. No abbreviations except for things like place, avenue, court. No strikeout. Don't let anyone scribble out a name, or they just one line through it. No nicknames, and it has to be notarized. If you're a notary, you cannot notarize it yourself. And you will have to look at that petition very carefully and walk the notary through it, because I've learned through experience, they're not always very smart. And there might be more help online, particularly concerning the portion that has to be notarized.
Yeah, because you
And when
really,
they're notarizing that you saw each one of those people sign
Yeah.
it.
And you
not-
have to sign,
And so if you pass it around in the room or something, you haven't really seen everybody.
well, but you're taking responsibility, and you have to sign in front of the notary. You cannot sign it at home. You have to sign
but
it.
it's very important to make sure that the notary, first off, that they sign in the right place. I've seen quite a few of these where the notary signed in the wrong place, which invalidates the signature because they sign on the circulator is supposed to sign. So make sure that you sign on the line that says circulator and the notary signs on the one that says notary public's signature. And also that the notary understands that all they're notarizing is the affidavit at the bottom, and you're swearing to that affidavit. So they're taking no responsibility for your saying that you saw everybody sign. So, because I've seen a few notaries like, well, I don't know if you saw everybody sign. It's like, well, you're not saying that you know that. You're saying that you know that I said that I saw it. So it's a little bit of a nuanced difference, but it's kind of important. And then the last piece is that I've got a stack of petitions here that folks can take, probably just one per person in the room. You can print this petition from our website, but if you print, they've got to be printed double-sided with the language of the amendment on the back. Otherwise, the signature won't count.
I think there was one question here, sir.
That was my second question was, there are 49 other states, and have they done an exhaustive study of how they redistrict? And, this, how does this stack up against the other 49? And, I hope we're just not patching the tire, a hit or two, but putting a new one in so that would last for a millennium or something,
Yeah. Yes, and the answer to that question is yes. So we have looked around. Our redistricting process, well, let me say one thing first. Redistricting all over the country is in need of some help. What we have done is looked at states where the redistricting is good, and looked at states like California where the redistricting was similarly bad, and they passed this kind of reform. And California just had its first election under their new map that was processed through this new process. First off, their redistricting process was amazing. You had this bipartisan commission going around the state, coming to a place like Arlington Heights in a meeting like this, and folks are able to stand up and come and talk about how they think the boundaries should look to make sure that Arlington Heights is protected in a legislative district. And literally on the screen, as you're saying, well, this church is really a part of this community, and this museum and this park, they all are part of the same community and kind of need to be in the same legislative district. And a mapper is sitting at a computer, and you can see it on the big screen, the lines coming around that community. So you say a thing, and they're like, is this what you're talking about? And those things are going into the record. And so that's how they drew their map, and they just had their first election under the new map. And unlike all the folks who said, like, oh, this is just a power grab by the Republicans, California did not turn into a Republican state. They elected more minority members to their legislature. The state of California, and those who know about the state of California will understand the impact of this, elected their first Asian American member of their state legislature in California.
First?
Yeah. So it was a much better process of redistricting, and it yielded a better map. It did not destroy voting rights. It did not give the state over to the Republicans. You know, it made a good balanced map where folks had to actually go out and campaign to voters and convince them to vote for them. Imagine.